let me just say hello, and then I will share my screen. It's just an honor to be here. I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite some time, and the issues that we'll talk about are as Steve said, both an intellectual activity for me, but really a practical activity at the moment, because I'm working with one of our schools, medium-sized school systems here in the county in which I live, to help plan their reopening plans. So I'm co-chairing the Superintendent's Council. So we've been involved in many, many meetings with community, with teachers, students, leaders, to really think about how are we going to return to school in the fall. So this project is very much at the forefront of my mind. I'm also a parent of 2 teenagers, one of whom just graduated from high school. And I also want to do a special shout out to Saskatchewan, because my husband is from there and my niece is a teacher in Kindersley. So with that in mind, as I said, I come to this work through a really big commitment to issues of equity. And I'm going to walk you through some slides just to give you a flavor for the kinds of things I think we might want to consider as we consider education, the pandemic, and beyond. So let me share my screen to you. So let's dive in. There's some questions that I wanted to pose for this conversation that I'm hoping that you'll help think about as well. And Steve, a shout out to you, because I've been influenced by the podcast I just heard that you produced with Simon Breakspear and some other folks I've been talking with. And this is a real opportunity, because I think this pandemic is really changing the way we think about school. This is a wonderful opportunity. I don't think I've seen a time in my career where we've really had a chance to pause and rethink what the purpose of school is, think about the role of school in students' lives. And this gives us an opportunity to really think about, can we strive for something better than a return to normal? And I will say that this is something that I see very much in the K-12 education community, people really thinking through this issue. A little bit less so in the university world in which I'm inhabiting. We're focusing really much on returning to normal rather than something better than a return to normal. So this is a wonderful opportunity for us to think about what's working well and what hasn't been, particularly for groups of students that we haven't served well for many years. So we have this opportunity to think about how might we mitigate opportunity gaps, mindful that those gaps in many cases have actually been growing since the pandemic began, for all sorts of reasons that I'll discuss a bit today, and I know Pedro will also. And then the other piece is, how are we going to monitor student progress? So in my career, I've spent a lot of time thinking about the role of data and evidence in understanding how students are learning, and thinking very broadly about those things. But I think this is a time that we really need to do some deep thinking around that, because we have opportunities to reshape what that looks like and to use data in ways that open doors for students rather than to close them. And I know some of you have heard me talk about this before. So as I mentioned, one of the formidable issues that we're facing right now is that COVID-19 has exacerbated existing inequalities in many of our communities. And so we have to do some thinking around how are we going to better serve students who have not been well served, but also are now likely to be faced with higher dropout rates, massive health issues, massive economic issues in communities. And as we do that, I think it's important to keep in mind what John Diamond and Amanda Lewis have talked about, which is that even there are schools that we think are functioning well, good schools are not always good for all kids. And so even when we can point to examples of schools that have done phenomenally, they oftentimes aren't serving everybody well. And so as we think about change, we can't simply rely on sort of generic change strategies and improvement strategies. We have to really, in this historical moment, intentionally address racial equity. So that's my charge really today, is to think about that as we move through some new ideas here. So some of the things that we're thinking about here on the ground as we plan for school reopening are thinking about equity and consistency in the student experience, knowing that we have parents who will not be comfortable sending their children to school. In systems across the world, I'm sure there's a wide variation there, but that equity piece is really important, as well as the consistencies. And one of the the tricky matters is in establishing some instructional priorities and planning accordingly. And I'm going to kind of give you some of the challenges that come with that in a minute. But it's also become abundantly clear that supporting students' socio-emotional well-being is at the heart of what we're doing. And I think we have a lot to learn, certainly in the United States, about how systems around the world are doing this. Because when I've spent time in other countries, and was recently in Denmark before the world shut down for travel, and other systems have been thinking about this for a long time, and yet there's those of us around the globe in places like the U.S., this is not an aspect that we've given enough attention to in school. Yet, if we're going to achieve equity goals, this is going to be critical. On the data end, it's also really important to avoid the temptation to engage in massive assessment in the first 2 weeks of school. So some of you are in systems that have already reopened or didn't close, but one of the big questions that's coming up is, how will we know where students are academically when they return? And because we want to support their socio-emotional well-being, we really have to think about a warm welcome, which does not involve a massive range of assessment to diagnostics to figure out where they are. We really need to rethink that idea as we use data in much more thoughtful ways to support the goals that we have in mind. So some of the questions that I hear on the table are making me a little bit nervous. Obviously, there's a big push to say, how can we accelerate students and get them back up to speed? Some systems are thinking about a very back to basics approach with a focus, primarily on literacy and math. And while that might lead to some short-term gains, and those things are, of course, issues we must be focusing on, we really have to think about, again, the socio-emotional element and the ways in which we're going to draw students back into school. It's going to be more important than ever that we really think about providing a rich curriculum that has various attributes that are going to engage students and excite them to be there. And so a full day on 2 subjects, particularly in the elementary grades, is going to be a challenge. So we know at least one system isn't providing music and physical education and drama and art, and we have to really think about, what are we losing in the student experience when we make those kinds of decisions? So how can we provide a personalized, rich learning environment while at the same time trying to address some of the learning gaps that we now have? And I have some thoughts on this, and I think a lot of it is how we frame the problem. So another issue that we've learned is that learning modalities are going to be tricky. Some of the things that we know from the learning sciences, that learning is a joint activity, are going to be challenging in an environment that looks like this, for example. How could we do cooperative learning? What accommodations could be made? So how do we do what we know is best for students' learning in an environment that physically doesn't accommodate for that? So we need to do some really deep thinking around how to support what we know is good learning and teaching, even in an environment which maybe is not as conducive as it could be. And one of my big mantras at the moment, whenever I talk with folks, is to really say that although the temptation is going to be to focus on the students' weaknesses and their deficits and where we think that they've fallen short or lost ground, I believe we're going to have a much more successful approach if we identify students' strengths. So we want to move from what this graphic looks like to this one. And so as we think about those things, it's not a matter, again, of identifying where the students' weaknesses are. It's a matter of thinking about, in all the ways in which they learned over the last several months, how can we build on those learnings? So as we do that, it's really important to think about, rather than what does the student not understand and what don't they know how to do, but really, what do they understand? Where are their strengths? How do we see this and when we look at their work? And so this set of questions could be asked as students start to produce various forms of evidence on their learning, whether it's simply, tasks that are completed in class or engaging in dialogue. How are we uncovering what the student does know how to do, and how can we build on that? We know there are going to be vast differences in what students bring with them to school in terms of these strengths, because they're going to have had a wide range of experiences, many of them having gone through quite dramatic traumas in the months that they haven't been with us. So when I think about how we might use evidence on student learning in ways that promote equity and excellence, we want to think about using data in ways that challenge assumptions rather than confirm them. And so, and think about the practices that are inhibiting their opportunity to learn rather than labeling students or placing blame on families. And I'll give you an example of this. I was in a conversation with the teacher researcher collaborative that I lead. And some of the teachers, these were kindergarten teachers this particular day, and they were connecting with their students on Zoom or starting to. And one teacher said, I'm really nervous about connecting with my students because I know some of them live in homes where there's multiple families in a one-bedroom apartment, and I have a feeling they're going to be reluctant to share. And so I'm trying to design my instruction in ways that will make it comfortable for them. And while a laudable goal, and she had a set of assumptions around these students and how they would perceive this learning modality, several other teachers chimed in and said, I have students in exactly the same circumstance in my classes, and they are absolutely loving showing their homes to me and sharing, their pets and, who lives with them and so on. And so I think helping each other kind of question some of the assumptions we might have about student experiences and what they have been engaging in the last several months is really important. So some of the strategies for recovering learning loss that have been suggested include personalized learning. Again, they also include a back to basics approach, which I have some questions about if done exclusively. Tutoring is likely to be a very helpful strategy. We might think about providing that in an online situation. Our school system that I'm working with is thinking about how to work with teachers who are at an age or at a health level that makes them vulnerable, and that perhaps this is something that they might be able to engage in an online way. There's talk about the practice of looping because teachers have already built relationships with students from this year. Could they have those teachers in some fashion next year? Taking advantages of school breaks to provide some learning opportunities. But again, allowing this time for play and socialization because that's a part that many students have been missing. And then deepening our partnerships with after-school care providers. And this looks different in many different countries, but I think, that seamless transition in learning is going to be key, particularly if students aren't there at school for a full day. So these are some of the ways in which we might recover some of the learning losses. And a huge piece of this is engaging with parents and communities. And so parents have been supporting their children's learning in a whole range of different ways. And in many cases, built stronger relationships with teachers as there's been more transparency around the teaching craft. And so this is a wonderful opportunity to build on those relationships and to think about how we can, partner with parents in new ways, as they've been the key people understanding their kids' learning over the last number of months. So an additional piece, and I know many systems are thinking about it, I know the one I'm working with is thinking about not just supporting student learning, but teacher learning. This has been a time of great learning for teachers. We want to think about how to support them at the different stages in which they're at, continue to support their professional communities, their collaboration. As much of that's moved online, and many teachers have reported that's actually been beneficial because they can now collaborate at times of day that are a bit more optimal for them. So we want to think about how do we use those collaborative spaces in ways that are explorative and experimental and move teachers to that work rather than repel them from the work. So nobody needs another ineffective or inefficiently used Zoom meeting, that is for certain. So how can we take advantage of these spaces to help teachers move towards the goals of equity that we're thinking about? And as I mentioned earlier, welcoming students in a way that's supportive and is incredibly important. This is a picture from a school, a very innovative school in New Zealand called Stonefields, and they opened a couple of weeks ago, and you can actually go online and look at their video, and it's really a wonderful rainbow mosaic, literally, of what they've done to welcome back students. So this piece is going to be absolutely critical as we plan for students' returns. And finally, I think it's really important that we build on the bright spots. I mean, in addition to building on student strengths, I think what we have seen recently is an unprecedented level of problem solving, and in recent weeks, an unprecedented level of commitment to addressing deep issues in our school systems, including systemic racism, thinking about the connections between school and society as a as schools have reproduced inequalities. There's a lot of interest in now bringing people together to address these issues, and to also thinking about what innovation might look like. There's, you'll see a picture there of a teacher with a clear mask on, and some of the teachers of the younger students that we've been talking with have said that, seeing teachers' mouths is so important. So they're thinking of new ways of how that can happen, even in an environment like ours where masks are likely to be required. There are different ways in which students are learning to distance. Younger ones using hula hoops and on the playground, and older ones using apps. So we've got a lot of expanded technology knowledge. We've got increased parental understanding. We have many new kinds of relationships that we've built. And I do think this is the time. We really have an opportunity to reinvent what the school system looks like. But if we aren't holding equity front and center, I think we have a chance we will see much greater inequalities than we've seen before. So our community is a wonderful one in which we can work together to think jointly about how to support this important goal as we move forward. Thank you.